The streetlights of Atlanta have their own rhythm, a quiet hum that fills the air long after most have gone to sleep. The city's nights are warm, thick with the smell of asphalt and fried food drifting from the corner stands that stay open too late. In one of those neighborhoods where the pavement cracks in spiderweb patterns and the sound of traffic fades into a low whisper, a basketball echoed between buildings, and behind that sound was a boy, smiling. Anthony Edwards was that boy. His laughter could cut through the dark like a spark, bright and quick, bouncing off the walls of empty courts. It wasn't the laughter of someone untouched by pain. It was the laughter of someone who refused to let pain win. In every bounce of the ball, every chuckle between breaths, you could hear a quiet defiance, the sound of someone choosing joy, even when the world offered something colder. He grew up in a part of Atlanta that didn't offer easy comfort. Life there taught lessons early about loss, about responsibility, about how quickly you have to grow up when the world doesn't wait for you. But Anthony found something that steadied him, a basketball, a cracked rim, a few neighborhood kids who believed in chasing dreams too big for their block. For most people, those courts were just patches of cement under yellow lights. For him, they were everything. On humid nights, the kind that make the air feel heavy, Anthony would stay out long after others had gone home. He'd dribble until his arms ached, shoot until the net was a blur, talk to himself about the day he'd make it out. His smile wasn't just a reaction. It was a tool. It kept him grounded. It kept him light. Even as a kid, he seemed to know something adults often forget, that laughter doesn't mean you're blind to hardship. It means you're brave enough to face it. Neighbors used to talk about him. "That Edwards boy," they'd say. "He don't stop smiling." They didn't always understand how deep that went. He wasn't naive. He'd already seen too much, lost too much. But even when grief sat heavy on his shoulders, he wore that grin like armor. It was his way of telling the world, "I'm still here." He played football at first. It's what most kids did around there. Friday night lights, shoulder pads, touchdowns. And Anthony was good, really good, fast, powerful, unafraid to take a hit. Coaches saw a future in him, a possible star on the field. But something else called to him. It wasn't the roar of the crowd, it was the quieter sound, the hollow thump of a basketball hitting the ground, the swish that came after release, that perfect silence between bounce and net. His older brother, Antoine, was the one who first saw what that sound meant to him. Antoine was older, protective, the kind of brother who made sure Anthony stayed out of trouble. When he realized how serious the younger Edwards was about basketball, he encouraged it, told him to play like every shot mattered, told him that every smile, every laugh could be his weapon against doubt. And when tragedy hit, when Anthony lost his mother and grandmother within months of each other, that weapon became everything. The two women who had shaped his world were gone, and yet he found a way to keep going. He was only in middle school, but he carried himself with the weight of someone far older. That smile, which had once been carefree, became quieter, deeper, not forced, just full of understanding. In the evenings, after practice, he'd look up at the sky. He'd tell himself they were still watching, his mom and grandma sitting somewhere up there, proud of him. "I'm going to make you proud," he'd whisper to the night. Then he'd grin again, because he knew they wouldn't want to see him sad. That was the kind of love they'd left behind, strong enough to survive even death. When you look at Anthony Edwards now, that joy still shines through. Reporters call him confident, fans call him funny, teammates call him electric. But before the lights, before the cameras, there was this, a boy dribbling under streetlights, laughing at the dark because he refused to be afraid of it. His story doesn't start with fame. It starts with resilience wrapped in joy, a kind of unshakable faith that no matter what happens, he'll find something to smile about. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear that ball again. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of hope, the kind of sound that carries through neighborhoods like a heartbeat. Every great player starts somewhere, but not every player begins with that kind of light. For Anthony, it wasn't about escaping the dark. It was about learning to shine within it. That smile, that laughter, they weren't for show. They were survival. They were the sound of a boy telling himself, "You've still got something to give." And as the night deepened and the last echo of his dribble faded into the Atlanta air, the city seemed to listen, because somewhere inside that laugh was a promise. The world might be heavy, but he'd carry it with joy. That was the beginning, not of fame, not of highlights or interviews, but of identity. The boy who smiled through the struggle didn't just grow into a star. He became proof that happiness, even when it's hard, can be its own kind of strength. And that night, under those flickering lights, the world didn't know it yet, but a new kind of star had already begun to rise. Before Anthony Edwards became the face of a franchise, before the smiles on camera and the thunderous dunks that shook arenas, he was simply Ant, a kid from Atlanta's southwest side who knew how to light up a room even when the power went out. Atlanta wasn't just his hometown. It was his teacher, his forge, the place that burned away weakness and replaced it with something strong, something unbreakable. Atlanta has a rhythm of its own. The air hums with music, trap beats spilling out of cars, gospel songs from open church doors, and laughter that rings through narrow streets lined with faded murals and brick houses. For a boy like Anthony, those sounds were the soundtrack of childhood. His world was a mix of noise and motion, kids racing bikes down cracked sidewalks, sneakers squeaking on blacktop courts, and the chatter of neighbors who all knew each other's stories. In that noise, there was comfort. In that chaos, there was family.
Anthony's mother, Yvette, was the center of that world. She was his anchor, strong, firm, and full of warmth. To her, discipline wasn't cruelty, it was love disguised as structure. She believed in hard work, in earning everything you got. She didn't let Anthony slack, not in school, not in chores, not in attitude. If he showed signs of quitting, she was there to remind him, "You're not built to give up." Then there was his grandmother, Shirley. She balanced Yvette's firmness with gentleness. She cooked, she prayed, and she made sure Anthony never left the house without feeling cared for. Between them, the boy was wrapped in both fire and softness, the perfect mix for someone who'd one day need both to survive the NBA spotlight. But love doesn't always get to stay. When cancer took both Yvette and Shirley in the same year, the world shifted beneath Anthony's feet. He was barely a teenager, still figuring out who he was, when grief forced him to grow up overnight. The smiles that came so easily turned quieter for a while. The laughter didn't vanish. It just carried a new kind of weight. He once said in an interview that every time he steps on the court, he's doing it for them. It's not a slogan. It's a truth he's lived with since that moment. In the years that followed, Atlanta became both comfort and challenge. He bounced between relatives, staying close to the people who could keep him grounded. His older brother, Antoine, took on the role of protector, making sure Ant stayed focused stayed safe, stayed out of trouble. Antoine pushed him, but he also reminded him to enjoy life, to keep that light alive even when the world tried to dim it.
It's strange how a city can raise someone. The blocks around Anthony's childhood home were full of contradictions, poverty and hope, danger and joy. He saw kids with talent fade away because of bad luck or bad choices. He saw how easy it was to fall behind when no one believed in you. But he also saw how laughter could keep people going, how faith and humor could coexist even when everything else fell apart. He once said that he never looked at himself as a victim. He saw what he had instead of what he lost. That mindset didn't come from fame. It came from the streets of Atlanta, from watching people survive and still smile through it all. By the time he was in middle school, basketball had become his outlet, his escape, and his compass. There was something about the game that mirrored his city: fast, fearless, unpredictable. He started to play more seriously, spending hours at local gyms and community courts. Coaches noticed the raw talent right away. He was quick, strong, and explosive. But more than that, he played with joy, the kind that can't be taught. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights when the gym lights were dim, when he didn't have the best shoes, when practice meant walking home tired and sweaty through streets that never felt fully safe. But that's where the fire began, not in bright arenas or packed stadiums, but in those quiet, uncertain nights when quitting would have been the easier choice. Anthony's city didn't hand him success. It handed him grit. It showed him loss, then handed him love through the people who stayed. It taught him to find laughter in pain, to dance through pressure, and to turn hardship into energy. When people see him smiling after a tough loss now, they sometimes think it's arrogance or immaturity. But that's not it. That's Atlanta in him. That unshakable spirit that refuses to let disappointment win. It's the spirit of kids who grew up learning to find light even when the world went dark. If you were to walk down his old neighborhood today, you'd see what shaped him: the cracked driveways, the worn-out hoops, the kids still playing under the same fading lights. They'd tell you stories about the boy who used to run through here, laughing, dribbling, always talking about making it big. They'd tell you how his energy was contagious, how you couldn't stay mad or tired when Ant was around. That was his magic, and it started right here. Anthony Edwards didn't just come from Atlanta. Atlanta lived in him. The rhythm, the resilience, the humor, they all became part of the way he played, the way he carried himself. He turned loss into laughter, grief into grit, and pain into purpose. Every time he smiles now, it's more than personality. It's a reminder of everything that built him. And as his story moved forward, from neighborhood courts to high school gyms, that fire only grew stronger. The struggle had given him something no coach could teach: the ability to love the game and life itself, no matter how hard they hit back. He was still that same kid at heart, the boy who laughed at the dark. Only now, the dark was watching him, learning what it means to be fearless in the light. If you ask anyone who grew up near Anthony Edwards, they'll tell you the same thing. His game was born on the blacktop. The street courts of Atlanta weren't polished or perfect. The rims leaned, the paint was cracked, and the air smelled like rain mixed with concrete. But to Anthony, those courts were sacred ground. They were where he first learned rhythm. Not just the rhythm of the ball, but the rhythm of life itself. Every afternoon after school, he'd drop his bag by the gate and run onto the court like it was home.
The sound of sneakers scraping the ground became his music, and the laughter of his friends filled in the melody. There was no crowd, no scoreboard, no cameras, just kids chasing a feeling. A bucket wasn't just 2 points, it was a statement. A crossover wasn't just a move, it was a language. That was the playground gospel, a sermon preached through sweat and confidence. Anthony had the kind of energy that changed the temperature of a game. He'd joke before the tip-off, laugh mid-play, and talk to his opponents with the kind of charm that made trash talk feel like conversation. He made the game fun, not just for himself, but for everyone watching. Even when he was the youngest on the court, he played like the court belonged to him. The older players noticed. They'd call him young blood, daring him to drive on them, daring him to prove he belonged. And he did, over and over. His first step was lightning, his balance unreal, his confidence unshakable. He wasn't just athletic, he was joyful in his dominance. Every bucket came with a grin, every dunk with laughter that bounced off the backboard. Sometimes he'd stay out until the street lights flickered on. Long after the last game ended, he'd shoot alone, murmuring imaginary commentary, pretending he was already in the league. The city around him blurred into background noise. Those moments were private prayers, the kind you whisper when you believe in something bigger than yourself. The playground taught him things no coach could. It taught him how to play free, how to trust his instincts, how to stay fearless. Out there, mistakes didn't matter as long as you kept moving. He learned how to use his smile as a weapon, to disarm defenders, to unsettle the serious ones who mistook calm for weakness. His game wasn't just about skill, it was about spirit. By the time he started playing in organized leagues, Anthony already carried that street ball soul with him. Coaches were amazed. He had natural balance, power, and creativity, the kind of raw talent you can't teach. But what stood out most was the joy. Even in intense games, when the score was tight and tensions ran high, Ant would flash that grin and crack a joke. Sometimes his teammates would be nervous before tip-off, and he'd walk up and say, "Man, we're good, just play." That's how he was wired, to turn pressure into play. There were times when he'd get knocked down hard, scraped elbows, bruised knees, but he never stayed down long. He'd spring up, dust himself off, and laugh like it didn't hurt. To outsiders, it looked like arrogance, but those who knew him understood it was more than that. It was his way of telling life, "You can't keep me down." Local coaches started to take notice. They'd come to see the kid who played like he was lit from within. Word spread fast through the neighborhoods. "There's a boy who's different," they'd say. "Strong like a linebacker, quick like a guard, smiles like he's never lost." The playground gave him more than just competition. It gave him community. He wasn't playing to show off. He was playing to belong, to connect, to keep that spark alive in a world that could easily dull it. Older players became his mentors, offering advice, teasing him, testing his limits. They'd rough him up on purpose, then pat him on the back afterward. "You're gonna be something, little man," they'd say. And deep down, he believed it too. At home, his brother Antoine would ask him about those games. Anthony would come home sweaty, shoes caked with dust, eyes shining. "We ran 10 games straight today, and they still couldn't stop me." It wasn't bragging from ego. It was the joy of discovery, the feeling of finding something that made him feel alive again after everything he'd lost. The playground became more than just a court. It became his sanctuary,
his therapy, his classroom. It taught him rhythm, resilience, and rebellion. It taught him to love the process, to love the noise, the competition, the sweat. It also taught him that every player, no matter how good, gets humbled sometimes. There were older players who'd block his shot, push him around, laugh at his mistakes. But he never took it personally. He'd just smile and say, "You got me this time." That "this time" said everything. He always believed the next play would be his. By the time high school scouts started hearing his name, Anthony was already something like a local legend. He'd gone from the kid with the grin to the one everyone came to see. Some nights, even adults would line the fences just to watch him play. They saw something in him, that rare blend of talent and lightness, that mix of intensity and ease. He was fierce, but he was never angry. He wanted to win, but he wanted to enjoy it too. That's the thing about Anthony Edwards. His love for basketball was never about escaping his world. It was about celebrating it. Every time he stepped on the court, he carried a piece of Atlanta with him. The laughter, the rhythm, the fire. The playground didn't just shape his game, it shaped his heart. And as his skills grew sharper and his name began to spread beyond city limits, one thing remained constant: that smile. The same one that echoed under the streetlights, the same one that made the struggle a little less heavy. The gospel of the playground had been written in his spirit: play hard, stay joyful, and never stop smiling. By the time Anthony Edwards stepped into high school, the city already knew his name. Ant wasn't just the funny kid from the playground anymore. He was a rising storm, the kind of talent you could feel before you even saw it. His confidence wasn't loud or arrogant. It was calm, almost playful, like he knew something the world was still figuring out. When he arrived at Holy Spirit Preparatory School, he was still the same smiling kid from the neighborhood, but his world had suddenly gotten bigger. The small private gym smelled of hardwood polish and ambition. Banners hung from the ceiling, and new teammates sized him up the moment he walked in. Some had heard the stories: the kid from the South Side who could jump out the gym, who talked through every game with that grin like he was narrating a highlight reel. But seeing him in person was different. His energy filled the room before he even picked up a ball. Coaches described those first practices as electric. He wasn't just quick, he was explosive. His first step looked like a blur. His vertical seemed to break gravity, and his strength made contact almost useless. He'd drive through defenders, finish through hits, and then laugh afterward like it was nothing. But what separated him most wasn't his power. It was how loose he played. Where others tensed up trying to impress, Anthony seemed to be having the time of his life. His coach once said that you could tell from day one. This kid loved basketball in its purest form. It wasn't a job, not yet. It was a joy. Practices turned into performances. Scrimmages turned into shows. By the end of his first year, the gym started to fill up with people who just wanted to see him play. Scouts started appearing in the bleachers. Recruiters began calling, but fame didn't seem to change him. Between drills, he'd joke around, tease his teammates, make everyone laugh. Even as his highlight clips started circulating online, thunderous dunks, chase down blocks, impossible layups, he stayed grounded. The same smile from the playground still lived on his face. The same laughter echoed through the gym. At Holy Spirit Prep, Edwards wasn't just an athlete. He became a leader. His teammates fed off his energy. If the team was down, he'd lighten the mood with a joke or a grin. then go out and score 10 straight points. He carried pressure like it was weightless. Games that should have broken players his age seemed to feed him instead. There's a story from one of his early seasons. The team was losing badly. Morale was gone and everyone looked defeated. During a timeout, Anthony looked around at his teammates and smiled. "We good," he said. "They can't guard me forever." Then he walked back on the court and proved it. Every shot, every drive. It was like he was rewriting the game in real time. They won that night. His coach said the comeback didn't start with skill. It started with that grin. He also had another identity forming, Ant-Man. The nickname came from his father, who once joked that Anthony was small but strong, just like the comic book hero. It stuck. Friends used it. Teammates shouted it. Fans loved it. Ant-Man became part of his myth, a playful name for a player who could shrink defenders and grow larger than life in the same breath. Recruiting became serious business by his junior year. 5-star rankings, ESPN highlights, comparisons to NBA stars. Colleges lined up with offers, but Anthony's mind wasn't just on prestige. He wanted family, comfort, connection, something that reminded him of home. That's why, when it came time to choose, he looked close to his roots. The University of Georgia wasn't the glamorous pick. It wasn't the powerhouse people expected a #1 recruit to choose. But for Anthony, it was right. It was still Georgia, still home. The same roads that led him to those playground courts would now take him to college arenas. It felt like a promise, not just to himself, but to the people who raised him.
Before he left high school, though, he made sure to leave a legacy. He broke scoring records, won accolades, and led his team through moments that would later become local legend. But what everyone remembers most wasn't just the stats. It was the feeling he brought. Watching him play was like watching sunlight move, bright, unpredictable, alive. Even when games were tight, he played with joy that made people forget the tension. Scouts loved his athleticism, but they didn't always understand his calmness. He didn't chase the spotlight. It just followed him. He wasn't the loud, brash teenager you'd expect from the highlight reels. Off the court, he was humble, funny, and thoughtful. Teachers said he treated everyone the same, whether it was a star teammate or a custodian sweeping the hallway. He smiled at everyone. He remembered names. But inside, there was still fire. A quiet one. Every time he looked at the rim, he wasn't just thinking about points. He was thinking about his mom, his grandma, his brother watching from the stands. He was thinking about all the nights he'd stayed up late imagining this. The laughter and the joy, they weren't distractions. They were fuel. When he finally put on that Georgia cap on signing day, the smile on his face wasn't just pride. It was gratitude for Atlanta, for family, for every cracked court that taught him how to dream. He was ready for the next chapter, one that would test not just his skill, but his heart. College basketball would bring critics, expectations, and pressure. But as Anthony walked out of his high school gym for the last time, you could see it clearly. He wasn't afraid. The same grin that once lit up playgrounds was still there. The world was about to find out what Atlanta already knew. Anthony Edwards wasn't just coming, he was rising, fast, fearless, and smiling all the way up. When Anthony Edwards arrived at the University of Georgia, he wasn't walking into the spotlight, he was carrying it with him. The campus in Athens was a world away from the cracked courts of Atlanta, yet in some ways it felt familiar. The southern heat, the hum of students walking between classes, the sound of sneakers squeaking in the gym.
All of it carried echoes of home. But this was a new chapter. The game was faster now, the expectations heavier, and for the first time, the world was truly watching. Anthony had chosen Georgia when everyone expected him to go somewhere else. Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina, one of the basketball giants. But he stayed close to home, saying he wanted his family to see him play, that he wanted to represent his state. That decision said everything about who he was. Loyalty over luxury, familiar roots over bright lights. He wasn't chasing attention, he was chasing peace. Athens welcomed him with open arms, though not without curiosity. Georgia wasn't a school known for producing NBA stars, especially not ones like him. Explosive, dynamic, built for highlight reels. But Anthony didn't care about history. He was there to make his own.
From his first practice, teammates could tell there was something different about him. His intensity didn't come from yelling or chest thumping. It came from joy. He played like the court was his comfort zone, even in scrimmages. During warm-ups, he'd sing along to the music, crack jokes, then drop 30 points without blinking. Coaches said it was like watching two different people, the comedian before the whistle and the killer after it. His debut game said it all. On November 5, 2019, against Western Carolina, he scored 24 points. Smooth, confident, effortless. The fans saw what the scouts had been whispering about, a teenager with the body of a veteran and the soul of a playground prodigy. Then came the Michigan game, the one that turned heads nationwide. Georgia was down big. The game seemed out of reach. And then Anthony caught fire. 33 points in one half. Step backs, dunks, threes from deep. Every shot fell. The arena shook. Commentators started using words like special and unreal. He finished with 37 that night, and though Georgia lost, the nation had found its next star. But Anthony's time in Athens wasn't all highlight reels. The Bulldogs weren't a powerhouse team. They lost more than they won that season. Some nights, it looked like he was carrying the whole program on his shoulders. Yet even in defeat, his energy never dropped. He'd still smile, still clapped for teammates, still crack jokes in post-game interviews. Some reporters mistook it for immaturity, but for him, it was survival, the same spirit that carried him through loss and loneliness as a kid. If he could smile through those days, he could smile through a bad shooting night. His coach, Tom Crean, pushed him hard. Crean saw both the talent and the responsibility that came with it. "You're not just playing basketball," he told Anthony. "You're setting a standard." Anthony took it to heart. He wasn't perfect. There were moments of frustration, times he drifted through games, moments where youth showed. But each time he stumbled, he learned. Slowly, the fire that had always lived inside him began to focus. Off the court, he was still the same Ant everyone knew. Funny, approachable, magnetic. He'd light up the locker room, pull pranks, sing during film sessions. He called his teammates brothers and treated the staff like family. Fans around campus adored him. He'd take pictures with students, crack jokes with kids, show up to events with that big, easy grin. He made everyone feel like they knew him. And in a way, they did. But underneath the laughter, he was driven. Nights after games, when most players had gone home, he'd still be in the gym, headphones in, hood up, practicing footwork, jumpers, and finishes around the rim. He didn't post about it. He didn't talk about it. He just did it. Because in his mind,
Joy and work weren't opposites. They were twins. You play hard because you love it. You smile because you know how far you've come. Georgia fans embraced him as their own. They knew he wasn't there for long. Everyone did. But for that single season, he gave the program something it hadn't had in years: hope. People came to see him play, not just for the stats, but for the feeling he brought. The way he could make a 15-point game feel like a street battle from home. The way his laughter made even losses seem like lessons. By March, the season was winding down, and NBA scouts filled every arena he played in. The chatter grew louder. "He's going #1." Analysts compared him to Dwayne Wade, to Donovan Mitchell, to a young Jordan. But Anthony didn't get caught up in it. When reporters asked about the draft, he'd shrug and say, "I just want to hoop." And that's exactly what he did. He hooped with heart. He wasn't chasing validation. He was chasing moments. Those flashes of joy when the ball left his hand, when the crowd rose in unison, when he'd point to the sky after a big play. Those were his rewards. When the season ended, Georgia's record wasn't glamorous, but no one cared. The team had Anthony Edwards, the kid who turned losses into lessons, who made people believe again. He declared for the NBA draft soon after, sitting in front of cameras with that familiar grin. "I'm ready," he said. "I've been ready."
And he was. The kid from Atlanta who smiled through grief had smiled his way to the top of the basketball world. He had played for his city, for his family, for himself.
Athens had been a brief stop, but it was the bridge between who he was and who he was becoming. As he packed up his dorm and said goodbye to teammates, he didn't say much. Just a laugh, a hug, and a promise. "I'll make you proud." Then he walked out into the sunlight, confident, unhurried. The next chapter calling. The world was waiting. The NBA lights were waiting. But deep down he knew the smile would still be the same. The night of the 2020 NBA draft didn't sound like the ones that came before it. There was no crowded arena, no roaring audience, no players shaking hands with the commissioner under blinding lights. The world was quiet, uncertain. The pandemic had changed everything. Yet in one house in Atlanta, the air buzzed with a different kind of electricity. Anthony Edwards sat in his living room, surrounded by family and close friends. The walls were warm with laughter, food, and the low hum of conversation. The TV flickered with the NBA broadcast, but all eyes were on him. Even in the biggest moment of his life, he was calm, joking, smiling, teasing his siblings about who was going to cry first. The nerves were there, buried under that same grin that had carried him since childhood. He wasn't thinking about pressure. He wasn't thinking about the critics who said he wasn't ready or that his focus drifted too easily. He was thinking about his mom and grandma. He had promised them he'd make it here, and now he was about to. When the commissioner's voice came through the screen, with the first pick in the 2020 NBA draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Anthony Edwards. The room erupted. Cheers, hugs, tears, laughter. Anthony leaned back, eyes closed for a second, a smile spreading across his face. The boy from Atlanta had just become the #1 pick in the world's biggest basketball league. He didn't jump or scream. He just smiled wider. For him, it wasn't disbelief. It was gratitude. Every night on the playground, every loss, every moment he'd chosen laughter over anger, it had all led to this, the first overall pick. The media saw the confident interviews, the casual jokes, the humor that made him instantly likable. But underneath, it was a deeper truth. He wasn't just happy for himself. He was happy for his family, for his neighborhood, for every kid still dribbling under those Atlanta streetlights. Minnesota was a long way from home. The air there was cold, the streets quieter, the accents different. When he arrived, snow lined the roads, and his breath came out in clouds. He laughed the first time he stepped into negative-degree weather. "Man, this ain't Atlanta," he joked. But even through the chill, he carried warmth with him. His energy lit up every room, a burst of southern sun in the middle of a Minnesota winter.
The Timberwolves were a team in transition, young, talented, but searching for direction. Karl Anthony Towns was their established star, but the franchise had been struggling to find its identity. Some wondered if Anthony could be the piece to change that. Others doubted whether his smile could survive the grind of a losing season. Anthony heard it all. He didn't argue. He didn't lash out. He just worked. Training camp wasn't glamorous. Empty arenas, masked faces, long drills, film sessions that blurred together. But he soaked it in. Every day was a lesson. Every mistake was something to learn from. And even when practices dragged, he never lost his spark. Teammates said you could always hear him, laughing, singing, talking trash in good humor. When the season finally began, his introduction to the NBA wasn't gentle. The game was faster, the players stronger, the defenses smarter. He missed shots, turned the ball over, made rookie mistakes. The criticism came fast. Some said he wasn't aggressive enough. Others said he smiled too much. But that's what they didn't understand. For Anthony, that smile wasn't a sign of comfort. It was a weapon. Then came the moments, the flashes that made everyone realize he wasn't just another prospect. That February night against Toronto, when he exploded for 18 points in a single quarter. The February 26th dunk over Yuta Watanabe, a play so violent and beautiful that it became a viral moment overnight. The entire basketball world woke up to a simple truth. Anthony Edwards was not here to blend in. Even when the team lost, he gave fans something to believe in. There was an energy in his play that was contagious. He celebrated teammates' shots louder than his own. He danced in timeouts. He talked to opponents with the same smile that once disarmed defenders in Atlanta playgrounds. Reporters began to see it too. They'd ask serious questions about shooting percentages, and he'd crack a joke that had the entire press room laughing. It wasn't immaturity. It was authenticity. He didn't know how to be anyone else. Off the court, he quickly became a fan favorite. His interviews were legendary, unfiltered, hilarious, real. When asked about the Timberwolves' cold weather, he said he didn't even own a jacket yet. When asked if he watched basketball growing up, he admitted he used to prefer football. People didn't know what to make of that honesty at first, but then they realized that's exactly who he was. No pretense, no script, just Anthony being Anthony. Behind the scenes, though, he was all business. He studied film, improved his shot, learned defensive schemes, asked veterans for advice. Coaches began to notice how fast he picked things up. His natural charisma hid a sharp mind. He wasn't just playing the game, he was studying it, dissecting it, understanding what made stars into leaders. By the end of his rookie season, he was a different player. He finished averaging over 19 points per game,
ending the year as a finalist for Rookie of the Year. He didn't win the trophy, but it didn't matter. What he'd won was respect from teammates, from fans, and from the league itself.
As he packed for the offseason, he thought about how far he'd come. From laughing on cracked courts in Atlanta to laughing on national TV as the #1 pick. The joy had never left him. The stage was bigger now, the stakes higher, but the rhythm of his story hadn't changed. He was still smiling through the struggle, still finding a light where others saw weight. And though he didn't know it yet, the years ahead would test that smile in ways even he couldn't predict. The NBA has a way of humbling you. It doesn't care about high school highlights or draft rankings. It doesn't care how loud your name was in college gyms. Once you step onto that floor, the league asks one question: can you handle the grind? Anthony Edwards met that grind with the same weapon he'd always used: joy. The 2020-21 season was strange for everyone. The pandemic had shortened training camps, arenas were half empty, and teams were constantly adjusting to new health protocols. For rookies, it was a trial by fire. And for Anthony, that fire was Minnesota in the dead of winter. A city of cold winds, long nights, and expectations as heavy as the snow piled outside the arena. He didn't start the season as the Timberwolves' main option. That role still belonged to Karl Anthony Towns, with D'Angelo Russell as the second star. Anthony came off the bench early on, finding his rhythm, learning the pace, and figuring out where he fit. The jump from college to the NBA hit fast. Defenders were stronger, rotations quicker, and every mistake was amplified on film. But instead of frustration, he met it all with laughter. When he missed shots, he'd grin. When veterans barked at him for missed assignments, he'd nod, apologize, and joke his way back into focus. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he refused to let fear dictate his energy. "If I ain't smilin'," he once said, "I'm not me." That first half of the season was a learning curve. Flashes of brilliance mixed with moments of inexperience. But then, slowly, something clicked. The pace that once felt too fast began to slow down. The angles on drives became clearer. His confidence, always high, started matching his production. By mid-season, you could see the evolution. The way he attacked the rim with fury but landed with a grin. The way he'd pat teammates on the back after they missed shots, urging them to keep shooting. The way he handled media questions after tough losses. Never defensive, never sulking, always grounded. And then came the moments that made people stop and pay attention. There was the February night against Toronto, when he erupted for 18 points in the third quarter. Then, just days later, he delivered what would become one of the most replayed highlights of his career, the dunk. February 26, 2021. Yuta Watanabe jumped to contest a baseline drive, and Anthony launched into him like a storm breaking through silence. The impact echoed across the league. Commentators lost their voices. Social media exploded. Even players from other teams couldn't help but react. But what made the clip iconic wasn't just the dunk itself. It was Anthony's reaction. No celebration, no gloating, just a small smirk and a casual jog back on defense, like it was nothing new. For him, that dunk wasn't a statement. It was an introduction. Fans began to see what his teammates had already learned.
Behind the easy humor and calm confidence was a killer instinct. He wanted to be great, not eventually, but now. His coach at the time, Ryan Saunders, said that Anthony's energy was different. He walks into the gym and makes everyone lighter, Saunders said. Even on losing streaks, he's the one who keeps us believing. And losing streaks were aplenty. Minnesota struggled that year. Injuries, lineup changes, and inconsistency made the season a rough one. Most young players might have been crushed by it, but not Anthony. After every loss, he'd still crack jokes in the locker room. "We good," he'd say. "They gotta play us again."
That optimism wasn't denial. It was defiance. He refused to let negativity drain his spirit. Reporters started to notice something. The more he smiled, the better he played. His laughter wasn't distraction, it was rhythm. He played loose because he believed the game was supposed to be fun, even when it was hard. That attitude began to rub off on others. Teammates who used to hang their heads started smiling again. The locker room, once quiet and tense, became louder, lighter, full of banter. Anthony's presence was transforming the culture. His scoring numbers kept climbing. In March, he dropped 42 points against the Phoenix Suns, the most by any rookie that season. His drives were fearless, his jump shot improving, his defense more engaged. Every week, the league's highlight reels seemed to feature him. He wasn't just potential anymore, he was production. By season end, he averaged over 19 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. His efficiency had improved dramatically, his confidence never wavered, and his charisma had made him one of the most beloved young players in the league. He finished second in Rookie of the Year voting, just behind LaMelo Ball. Some fans argued he should have won. Anthony didn't seem to care either way. "I'm just blessed," he said with a smile. "I get to play basketball every day." But those who watched closely could see the shift. The laughter that once came from innocence now carried intent. He had proven he belonged. He had taken hits from the league and hit back harder. The Timberwolves, still searching for identity, had finally found their heart. When the season ended, Anthony returned home to Atlanta for a short break. Reporters caught glimpses of him working out in local gyms, the same places where it all started. He'd talk to kids, sign sneakers, and tell them, "Just have fun with it. Don't let nobody take that from you." That was his truth, the gospel he lived by. He wasn't pretending the grind didn't hurt. He just believed joy could carry you through it. Rookie year had tested him, the pressure, the losses, the noise, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had hardened his belief that happiness could be strength. The smile was still there, the laughter still filled locker room, but behind it now was something deeper: discipline, focus, and the quiet understanding that this was just the beginning. Anthony Edwards wasn't just surviving the NBA grind, he was learning to love it. And soon, the league would realize that kind of joy is dangerous. It can't be coached, and it can't be contained. There's a moment in every young player's career when potential turns into presence, when the flashes of greatness stop being surprises and start being expectations. For Anthony Edwards, that moment came quietly, somewhere between the losses that didn't break him and the laughter that refused to fade. The league had learned to pronounce his name, but it hadn't yet learned to measure his impact. That was about to change.
The 2021-22 season began with questions. Could he build on his rookie year? Could his game mature as fast as his charisma had? And could the Timberwolves, a team long searching for an identity, finally find one through him? The first answer came early. In his second season opener, Anthony dropped 30 points like it was routine. The smile, the swagger, the controlled explosion. It was all there. But what impressed coaches more wasn't his scoring. It was his control. The reckless drives had become calculated attacks. The defensive lapses that once frustrated teammates turned into steals and stops. The raw talent was hardening into purpose. In interviews, he still joked his way through every question, but there was steel beneath the humor now. He'd talk about film sessions, footwork, and matchups with the precision of a veteran. He studied opponents like puzzles, breaking them down play by play. The same instinct that made him unpredictable on offense made him a student of the game off the court. Something else shifted that season: his leadership. Karl Anthony Towns was still the face of the franchise, but Anthony was becoming its heartbeat. When the Wolves were flat, he lifted them. When the energy dipped, he brought it back with a grin, a dunk, or a line that made the bench erupt. His presence was contagious. There was a game against the Portland Trail Blazers that winter. The Wolves were down big, their body language heavy. During a timeout, Anthony stood up, clapped his hands, and shouted, "We're not folding." Then he smiled, as if daring the game itself to test him. He came out of the huddle and scored 15 straight points. They won. His teammates said later, it wasn't the points that changed the game, it was his energy.
Fans began to see his smile differently. It wasn't just charm anymore, it was courage, a visible reminder that you can face pressure without letting it consume you. It became his signature. When the Wolves were down, he'd grinned like he knew something nobody else did. When he dunked, he'd flash that grin toward the crowd, a silent promise that the show wasn't over. Minnesota started to believe again. The team that had been an afterthought began to feel alive. The chemistry between Karl Anthony Towns, and D'Angelo Russell clicked. They were fun, a team full of energy and attitude, finally giving the city something to cheer for. And at the center of it all was Edwards, the kid who never stopped smiling. Off the court, his legend was growing just as fast. His interviews were a mix of honesty, humor, and wisdom that felt rare for his age. When asked how he stayed so upbeat through struggles, he said, "Because I done been through worse, man. Basketball? This the fun part." He wasn't performing for the cameras. He was telling the truth. For someone who'd lost so much so young, the game was still joy. Pressure wasn't pain. It was proof that he'd made it to where he was meant to be. And then came the playoffs. In 2022, the Timberwolves made the postseason for only the second time in nearly 2 decades. Nobody expected much from them. The national spotlight was on their opponents, the Memphis Grizzlies. Young, loud, confident, but Anthony loved being underestimated. The brighter the lights, the bigger his smile. Game 1 in Memphis was supposed to be a learning experience. Instead, it became a warning. Anthony exploded for 36 points in his playoff debut, hitting shots from everywhere, attacking the rim like he was back on those Atlanta courts. Every bucket carried rhythm, every grin carried message. I belong here. That series was chaos. Trash talk, close games, wild swings in momentum. But through it all, Anthony stayed the same, steady, composed,
laughing even when the team trailed. He hit clutch shots, took on defensive challenges, and celebrated teammates louder than his own highlights. The Wolves didn't win the series, but something more important happened. A new star had arrived. After the elimination game, reporters expected him to sound defeated. Instead, he smiled and said, "We'll be back." And the way he said it, calm, confident, made people believe him. Over that offseason, Anthony became a symbol, not just of potential, but of positivity in a sport that often equates intensity with anger. Young fans gravitated toward him. He reminded them that greatness didn't have to mean grimness, that you could compete at the highest level and still carry light. His social media presence grew. Every quote, every laugh, every candid moment felt refreshing in a league filled with scripted personalities. But behind that joy, there was still hunger. He spent the summer training relentlessly, improving his shot, building his frame, sharpening his defense. When he returned for the 2022-23 season, there was no question anymore. The Timberwolves were his team. The coaching staff said it outright. He's our tone setter. And that tone was joy mixed with fire. Night after night, he delivered poster dunks, game winners, defensive plays that silenced crowds. But more than that, he gave fans a feeling. Watching him was like watching someone rediscover what the game was supposed to be: play. His smile had become more than expression. It was philosophy. It was proof that you could be fierce and free at the same time. It became a mirror for fans who'd forgotten that the game, like life, is supposed to be loved even when it hurts. By season's end, Anthony wasn't just Minnesota's future. He was the league's. Analysts began to talk about him not as potential, but as promise. A star not in the making, but already shining. And through it all, through every dunk, every defeat, every headline, he never stopped laughing. That smile, the same one born under Atlanta's streetlights, had become something bigger than him. It was a symbol, a reminder that joy, even in struggle, is its own kind of greatness. Behind the highlight reels and the roaring arenas, there's a quieter one the cameras don't always see. Off the court, away from the noise and lights, he isn't the showman or the entertainer. He's still Ant, the boy who laughs too loud, who checks in on his siblings, who cracks jokes in the kitchen just to make everyone forget how hard life once was. His fame has grown, but his roots have never moved. Anthony's sense of family runs deep, not as a slogan, but as a survival instinct. When his mother Yvette and his grandmother Shirley passed away from cancer during his early teens, his world could have easily broken, but instead he turned pain into purpose. He promised himself he'd carry their lessons, humility, discipline, and love in everything he did. In interviews, he still talks about them as if they're sitting in the stands, watching. "Everything I do," he says softly, "is for them." He keeps their memory close in small ways. Before every game, he looks up, whispers a few words to them. On his arm, tattoos bear their names, a reminder that no amount of fame can replace the foundation they built inside him. That's the quiet faith that drives him. Not religion alone, but belief. Belief that he's still being guided, still being watched over. Anthony became the caretaker of his younger siblings, growing into responsibility early.
When most kids his age were thinking about prom or part-time jobs, he was thinking about groceries, rides to school, bills that needed paying. That responsibility didn't make him bitter, it made him selfless. Even now, with millions in his bank account, he doesn't distance himself from those duties. He brings his siblings to games, involves them in his success, makes sure they understand that this life, the fame, the comfort, was built from struggle and love, not luck. He once said that his biggest goal wasn't a championship or an MVP. It was to make sure his family never had to worry again. "I already won," he smiled, "'cause my people good now." Off the court, he radiates that same warmth. Ask anyone around the Timberwolves organization, teammates, coaches, security guards, even arena staff. They'll all tell you the same thing. Ant treats everyone like family. He remembers names, cracks jokes, brings energy into every room. His joy isn't selective, it's generous. He's the kind of star who never acts like he's above anyone. That lightheartedness often hides how deeply he feels things. After tough losses, when reporters have gone home, he's known to sit quietly at his locker, towel over his head, processing. But even then, the silence doesn't last long. Sooner or later, someone cracks a joke, and his laughter fills the room again. That's how he heals, through humor, through connection. He's also become a voice of authenticity for younger fans. In a world where athletes are told to be polished, calculated, and brand safe, Anthony stands out for being real. When asked about fame, he once said, "Man, I'm just me. I hoop, I go home, I eat, I laugh. That's it." That simplicity has made him relatable, not just to kids who want to be like him, but to anyone who's ever fought to stay grounded in a world trying to change them. Faith, for Anthony, is less about sermons and more about spirit. He believes in energy, in putting good into the world and letting it return. You see it in how he interacts with fans, taking selfies, signing shirts, laughing mid-conversation. You see it in his community work, quiet donations, appearances at youth camps, motivational talks to kids who remind him of himself. He doesn't chase credit for those moments. He just shows up. One of his close friends once said, "Ant's joy is real, but it's earned. He had to fight for it. That's what makes it powerful." He's not smiling because life is easy. He's smiling because he's grateful that it isn't as hard as it used to be. There's also a protective side to him, fierce and loyal. He doesn't tolerate disrespect toward his teammates or his city. When critics come for Minnesota, he doesn't hesitate to defend it. "This is my team," he's said more than once, "and we're going to figure it out together." That loyalty, that faith in the collective, mirrors how he treats his loved ones. It's all family to him: teammates, coaches, staff, fans. Once you're in his circle, he rides for you.
Away from basketball, he has small joys that keep him human. He loves movies, especially comedies and action flicks. He loves spending time with his dogs, cooking simple meals, singing off-key to R&B tracks in the car. Those small, ordinary things keep him balanced. Fame can distort reality, but Anthony clings to the things that make him feel normal. When he talks about the future, his voice carries calm certainty. He wants to win championships, yes, but more than that, he wants to inspire. He wants kids in Atlanta, kids who've lost, who've struggled, who feel unseen, to look at him and realize that pain doesn't have to steal your joy, that you can lose everything and still laugh again. In that sense, his smile is a language, one that speaks of resilience, of love, of faith. Every grin after a tough loss, every laugh in a tense huddle, every handshake with a fan, it all says the same thing. We're gonna be all right. Anthony's journey off the court mirrors his game. Unselfish, fearless, full of heart. He's proof that strength isn't just about muscle or stats. Sometimes it's about how softly you can carry your story without letting it break you. When people talk about him as the future of the NBA, they often mean his athleticism, his talent, his scoring. But the real legacy he's building is quieter. It's in the way he makes people feel, like joy is still possible, even after pain. That's the fire that burns behind his grin, not arrogance, not showmanship, but love. The kind that endures, the kind that heals, the kind that keeps smiling even when the world doesn't.
By the summer of 2023, Anthony Edwards wasn't just Minnesota's rising star. He was one of the brightest young players in the league. But it wasn't until he put on the red, white, and blue that the world truly understood what kind of competitor he was. Representing Team USA was a childhood dream for many players. For Anthony, it was more than that. It was a chance to show that the same joy that carried him through loss, through doubt, through years of work, could lead even further. It was time to lead not just a team, but a nation's expectations. When the invitation came, he didn't hesitate. He'd grown up watching Team USA dominate the world stage. Kobe, LeBron, KD, Melo. Now, it was his turn to wear that jersey, to stand among the best young talents, and to prove that his fire burned just as fiercely. The FIBA World Cup roster that year was young, full of promise, but lacking the superstar veterans of old. For many analysts, Team USA looked vulnerable, talented, but untested. But from the moment training camp began, something changed. Coaches noticed it immediately. Anthony wasn't acting like a rookie to the international game. He was talking, laughing, leading drills, bringing energy that lifted the entire gym. Steve Kerr, the head coach, said afterward, he walked in like he'd been on the team for years. Anthony's confidence was unmistakable, but it wasn't arrogance. It was belief. When asked about being the team's go-to scorer, he didn't shy away. "I'm that guy," he said with a grin. And when reporters asked what gave him that assurance, he answered, "Because I put in the work." That's it. As Team USA began its exhibition games, his words turned into performance. Game after game, he became the engine. Explosive first steps, fearless drives, step-back threes. The same rhythm that Atlanta once heard echoing through its playgrounds now pulsed on the world stage. His joy was infectious. His teammates fed off it. Even opponents noticed it. The way he smiled mid-possession. The way he'd laugh after contact, like the game couldn't scare him. Then came that game, USA versus Germany. The semifinals before the final round. The team had struggled to find rhythm all night. Germany's guards were hot, the defense tight. The US looked tired, hesitant, on the brink of elimination. That's when Anthony Edwards took over.
He scored 24 points, hitting jumper after jumper, attacking the rim through double teams, bringing Team USA back from the edge. It wasn't just the points, it was the poise, the way he commanded the moment, the look in his eyes, calm, certain, fearless. It was the same energy he carried back in Minnesota when games looked lost, the same spark that always seemed to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." Even though Team USA eventually fell short of gold, the headlines afterward told a different story. Anthony Edwards had become the face of American basketball's future. Commentators around the world started calling him the alpha of Team USA, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it.
For fans overseas, he was a revelation. They saw a different kind of star, one who smiled his way through intensity, who never flinched under pressure, who played every possession like a gift. For a generation that had grown up on highlight reels and emotionless interviews, Anthony's authenticity felt electric. Back home, the praise poured in. NBA legends took notice. "He's got it," said Dwayne Wade. "He's got that fire." Others compared his leadership style to a young Jordan. The fearlessness, the competitive hunger, the belief that no stage was too big. But when Anthony was asked about the comparisons, he just laughed. "I'm Ant," he said. "That's enough." In post-game interviews, you could hear how much the experience meant to him. "I love representing where I'm from," he said. "Not just Atlanta, but the U.S. I play for the people who believed in me when I was nobody." The moment was more than a basketball milestone. It was a mirror of everything he'd become. He wasn't just a kid chasing a dream anymore. He was the leader, the steady hand in chaos, the player who smiled through the noise and let his game do the talking. Off the court, the world saw more of his personality than ever. His interviews became instant classics, honest, funny, completely unfiltered. Reporters couldn't get enough. He'd joke with them mid-question, answer with charisma that felt unscripted, but behind it all was a confidence built from years of fighting through hardship.
Fans everywhere started using one word to describe him: real. Because in a sports world full of careful sound bites and polished personas, Anthony was the rare star who sounded like himself. He didn't pretend, he didn't posture. He was exactly the same person in front of microphones as he was on the playground. Playful, fearless, alive. The Team USA experience cemented what Minnesota had already known. This wasn't just a great athlete, this was a leader who lifted spirits as much as scores. The same energy that revived the Timberwolves locker room was now inspiring a global audience. When the tournament ended and the U.S. returned home without the gold, Anthony didn't sulk. He smiled through the disappointment, shrugged, and said, "We'll get it next time." That confidence wasn't arrogance. It was faith. Faith in himself, in the work, in the story still being written. He returned to the NBA a different man, sharper, calmer, and hungrier. The world had just caught a glimpse of what Atlanta had always known. When Anthony Edwards smiles, it's never just for the camera. It's a warning. It means something's coming. And plane touched down in Minnesota, the next season looming. One thing was clear. He wasn't just representing his city anymore. He was carrying the spirit of every court he'd ever played on, every laugh he'd ever used to fight pain, every person who'd ever told him, "Keep going." The world had finally taken notice. And the best part? He was just getting started. By the time the 2023-24 NBA season rolled around, Anthony Edwards was no longer a rising star. He was the star, the kind of player whose name filled arenas, whose smile could make highlight reels trend before the final buzzer. Minnesota, long overlooked and underestimated, finally had a face, a heartbeat, a reason to believe again. The Timberwolves had become more than a team. They had become his story, a reflection of the kid from Atlanta who turned pain into purpose, laughter into light. There's a certain gravity that comes with stardom, the pull of attention, the endless noise of expectations, and the pressure that never sleeps. But Anthony moved through it all like he always had, light on his feet, easy in his spirit. The same joy that had defined his youth now defined his superstardom. Cameras followed him everywhere, but nothing about him changed. He still cracked jokes during warm-ups, still grinned at teammates in huddles, still danced on the sidelines when the music hit just right. When reporters asked how he handled the pressure, he gave the kind of answer only he could. Pressure? Man, I've been through pressure. This basketball stuff, this the fun part. That was his perspective. Unshakable, grounded, pure. He didn't pretend the spotlight was easy. He just refused to let it darken him.
The Timberwolves locker room revolved around that energy. Teammates described him as the spark. When the team was down, he was the first to clap, the first to shout encouragement. When they were winning, he was the first to remind everyone to stay loose. He played every game like it was both his first and his last. Hungry, yet grateful. On the court, his evolution was undeniable. His game had matured into something complete. Power and finesse woven together. The drives to the rim were still ferocious, but now they came with patience. His jumper, once streaky, had become reliable. His defense, once raw, had sharpened into purpose. He was no longer reacting. He was reading, anticipating, leading. There was a stretch that season where he seemed unstoppable, scoring 30, 40, even 44 points on nights when defenders looked helpless. He wasn't just scoring, he was commanding. When the game tightened in the fourth quarter, everyone in the arena knew who the ball was going to, and so did the defense. It didn't matter. He'd hit the shot, flash the grin, and point to the sky in quiet thanks. But what made his rise remarkable wasn't just the numbers. It was the way he carried them. Even as national media crowned him the next big thing, he never lost the humor that made him human. After one game-winning shot, a reporter asked if he'd felt nervous before taking it. He laughed. Nervous? Man, I was born for this. That self-assurance wasn't arrogance. It was a product of surviving everything that came before. He knew real fear. He'd faced it young, and he'd learned that joy was stronger. So when he stepped onto the court, pressure became peace. The ball, the lights, the crowd, they didn't intimidate him. They felt like home.
His influence extended beyond basketball. In a league filled with stars carefully crafting brands, Anthony stood out for being real. Fans saw themselves, the humor, the humility, the rough edges wrapped in light. He wasn't trying to be perfect, he was trying to be present. That authenticity became his trademark. He'd show up to post-game interviews with laughter still in his voice, giving honest answers no PR manager could have scripted. He'd talk about his favorite foods, tease teammates, joke about his dog's personality, Moments that reminded everyone that fame hadn't taken the kid out of him. Even global fame couldn't erase Atlanta from his voice. Still, the weight of stardom was real. The losses hurt more. The scrutiny grew louder. Critics dissected his shot selection, his leadership, his body language. Every move became a headline. But Anthony handled it all the same way he handled life, with perspective. He'd tell teammates, "We can't control what they say, but we can control how we play." That mentality, that blend of seriousness and serenity, became contagious. Coaches said the team fed off his composure. When others panicked, he steadied them. When things got tense, his smile reminded them why they loved the game in the first place.
There was a moment that season that defined everything. It wasn't a dunk or a buzzer beater. It was a loss, a hard one. The Wolves had blown a big lead, and the locker room was heavy. Anthony sat there for a minute, silent. Then he looked up and said, "It's just one night. We learn, we laugh, we move." The room relaxed. The tension cracked. That's who he was. A leader not by title, but by energy. His relationship with the Minnesota crowd deepened too. They saw in him a mirror of their own spirit. Gritty, resilient, never giving up. Every game, fans came not just to watch him score, but to feel his energy. He brought light into a city long overshadowed by its own cold winters. In him, they saw hope, something to believe in. And yet, beneath all the fame, Anthony stayed grounded in what truly mattered: family. After home games, he could still be found laughing with his siblings, taking photos with kids courtside, thanking the arena staff on his way out. Stardom hadn't changed him. It had simply given him a bigger stage to share his joy. When asked once what he wanted his legacy to be, he paused. "I just want people to remember I had fun," he said, "that I loved this game, that I gave it everything." And that's the essence of him. The wonder and the weight of stardom carried with lightness. He's proof that greatness doesn't have to mean grimness, that dominance can coexist with delight. Anthony Edwards' story isn't about escaping pressure. It's about redefining it. To him, pressure is just proof that something matters. And if it matters, it's worth smiling through. He's still that kid from Atlanta. Only now the world is watching, and maybe, just maybe, learning how to smile through their own struggle too. The arena lights fade one by one, leaving the court bathed in a soft, golden glow. The sound of the crowd, that rush of noise and heartbeat, begins to dissolve. And somewhere in that quiet, Anthony Edwards stands at half court, his head tilted back, eyes closed, a faint smile playing across his face. Another game done, another night in the story he's been writing since those cracked Atlanta courts. For most players, moments like these are about reflection, counting stats, thinking about legacy. But for Anthony, it's simpler. He still plays for joy. He still plays for love. He still plays for those who never got to see him grow into the man he became. When he looks up, he doesn't see banners. He sees faces. His mother, his grandmother, his brother, his city, the people who lit his path before the world ever knew his name. The kid who laughed through pain became the man who smiled through pressure. Somewhere along the way, that smile stopped being a reaction and became something more, a light for others. Around the league, players talk about him differently now.
They call him a throwback, not because of his playing style, but because of his soul. He reminds them of why they fell in love with the game. In an age of analytics and image, Anthony plays with something purer, emotion. He still celebrates every dunk like a kid who can't believe the rim bent for him. He still cracks jokes on the bench. And when he talks about basketball, his eyes still gleam like someone who never lost touch with wonder. Fans across the world have begun to recognize it too. In every city he visits, there are kids wearing his jersey, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. They see in him a kind of hope that you can come from struggle and still laugh your way forward, that pain doesn't have to harden you. It can teach you how to glow. Every once in a while, during post-game interviews, when the microphones crowd around his face, he'll flash that same grin and say something funny, something effortless. It reminds everyone that no matter how bright the lights get, they'll never outshine him. Not because of ego, but because his light comes from within. There's a story told by a Timberwolves staffer. After a long, grueling road trip, the team was exhausted. The bus was quiet, players half asleep. Out of nowhere, Anthony started singing softly to himself, some old R&B song from the early 2000s. Within minutes, the whole bus was laughing, clapping, singing along. The fatigue didn't vanish, but the weight did. That's what he does. He turns heaviness into rhythm. He reminds people that joy is a form of endurance.
He knows struggle doesn't disappear when success comes. The world still throws challenges, losses, criticism, but he's learned to face all of it with grace. When he misses a game winner, he shrugs, smiles, and says, "I'll make the next one." When injuries hit teammates, he checks in, lifts spirits. When fans criticize, he listens, nods, and works harder. His response to everything is the same: faith, laughter, and focus. He's not naive. He knows the story isn't finished. The NBA is full of rising stars who burn bright and fade. But something about Anthony feels different, sustainable. His game might evolve, his numbers might rise and fall, but the core of who he is doesn't change. He carries an inner peace that can't be coached or manufactured. It's the peace of someone who's already survived what life had to throw at him before the lights ever came on. When asked what keeps him smiling, he once said, "Because I got people watching me who need to see me happy." That's the kind of legacy he's chasing. Not just trophies, but transformation. To show kids who've seen too much, who've lost too early, that joy is still possible. That laughter, real laughter, is strength. He's still the same boy dribbling under streetlights in Atlanta. The same sound of the ball echoing through the night. The same soft hum of the city breathing around him. Only now the echo reaches farther, across states, across countries, across screens glowing in the dark. Anthony Edwards' story isn't just one of talent or success. It's about light, the kind that laughs back at the dark, the kind that doesn't pretend pain isn't there, but faces it and smiles anyway.
The kind that says, "You can't break me because I've already learned how to shine through cracks." He's still writing his chapters, still growing, still learning, still chasing the game that gave him everything and took nothing from his spirit. And wherever his path leads, championships, MVPs, new heights, one thing will stay constant: that smile, that reminder that joy, even after loss, can be the loudest kind of triumph. As the lights in the arena dim for the night, and the last echoes of the crowd fade into the rafters, his laughter lingers, soft, real, alive. It's the same sound that began all those years ago, bouncing off the walls of a neighborhood court, a promise whispered to the dark. Because the truth is, Anthony Edwards was never just a star who smiled through the struggle. He was the smile itself, proof that even in the hardest seasons, joy can still find a way to win. And as that light fades for the night, the voice of the storyteller returns, gentle and steady. Close your eyes. Breathe. The struggle doesn't last forever, but the light does. Sleep well, dream deep, and remember, sometimes the ones who laugh the loudest are the ones who fought the hardest.